Okay, Business Continuity Management, BCM. The Business Continuity Plan, BCP, is a process that helps organizations prepare for and respond to disruptive events. It involves several key steps. First, the business organization analysis. In this step, the organization's critical functions and resources are identified and analyzed to determine their importance and vulnerability. Example, a financial service company conducts a business organization analysis to identify critical functions such as customer support, trading, and IT operations, and assess their potential impacts if disrupted. Second, BCP team. A dedicated team is assembled to lead the BCP efforts, including representatives from various departments and functions within the organization. Example, the financial service company forms a BCP team that includes representatives from customer support, trading, IT operations, and senior management, with senior management being the most important because you need their buy-in. Third, validate BOA. The business organization analysis is validated to ensure that all critical functions and resources have been identified and analyzed. Example, the BCP team reviews the BOA to ensure that all critical functions and resources have been identified and analyzed, and that the organization's dependencies on external entities, such as vendors and partners, have been accounted for. Okay, next. 4, BIA. The business impact analysis is conducted to assess the potential impacts of a disruptive event on critical functions and resources. Example, the financial services company conducts a BIA to identify the potential finances and reputational impact of disruptions to customers, support, trading, and IT operations. 5th, continuity planning. Continuity plans are developed to ensure that critical functions and resources can be maintained or restored in the event of a disruptive event. Example, the BCP team develops continuity plans for customer support, trading, and IT operations that include procedures for backup and recovery, alternate work locations, and communication protocols. 6, approval and implementation. The continuity plans are approved by senior management and implemented across the organization. Example, the continuity plan for customer support, trading, and IT operations are approved by senior management and communicated to all employees and relative stakeholders. 7, maintenance. Continuity plans are regularly reviewed, tested, and updated to ensure their effectiveness. Example, the BCP team regularly reviews and updates the continuity plan for customer support, trading, and IT operations to account for changes in the organization's operation or external factors. Next, disaster recovery. Disaster recovery is a process that helps organizations restore critical systems and operations in the event of a disruptive event. It involves several key factors. 1, critical systems. Critical systems and operations are identified and the recovery priorities are determined. An example of that is a hospital identifies its electronic health records, EHR systems, medical imaging systems, and emergency department systems as critical systems that need to be recovered quickly in the event of a disaster. Second, MTD, RTO, RPO. The recovery time objective, RTO, and recovery point objective, RPO, and maximum tolerable downtime, MTD, are established for critical systems. Example, the hospital determines that the EHR system must be recovered within 4 hours for its RTO. Data loss must be minimized, RPO, and downtime can't exceed 12 hours, MTD, maximum tolerable downtime. Third, offsite selection. An offsite location is selected where critical systems and data can be stored and recovered in the event of a disaster. Example, the hospital selects a remote data center as an offsite location for storing backups of critical systems and data. Next, disaster recovery continued. 4th, recovery of critical systems. Procedures are developed for recovering critical systems and data from the offsite location. Example, The hospital develops procedures for storing backups of the EHR system, medical imaging systems, and emergency department systems from the remote data center. Fifth, normal systems. Procedures are developed for restoring normal systems and operations. Example, the hospital develops procedures for restoring non-critical systems and operations such as email and payroll systems. 6. Get back to the primary site. Procedures are developed for transitioning back to the primary site once it is safe and feasible to do so. Example, the hospital develops procedures for transitioning back to its primary site once the building is repaired and deemed safe for occupation. Next, business continuity planning. Step 1. Processes and planning is a key component of business continuity planning, BCP, and involves several important steps. A business organizational analysis. This involves analyzing an organization's business functions, processes, and dependencies to critical systems and determine the impact of a disruptive event. Example, an insurance company conducts a business organizational analysis to identify critical business processes such as claims, processing, policy insurance, and underwriting. Next, BCP team selection. A team is assembled to develop and execute the organization's BCP. The insurance company selects a BCP team consisting of representatives from various business functions and IT departments. Business continuity planning, and we'll go into the next step here, validates the BOA. The business organizational analysis was reviewed and validated to ensure that critical systems and processes are identified correctly. Example, the insurance company's BCP team reviews and validates the business organizational analysis to ensure that all critical business processes have been identified. Next, resource requirements. Resource requirements are identified for executing the BCP. The insurance company identifies the resources required to execute its BCP, such as backup power, telecommunication, and personnel. Next, legal and regulatory requirements. Legal and regulatory requirements are identified and incorporated into the BCP. Example, the insurance company ensures that its BCP complies with legal and regulatory requirements, such as data privacy regulations and insurance industry regulations. Next, the business impact analysis is a critical step in the business continuity plan process that helps identify an organization's critical business functions and assess the impact of a disruptive event. The BIA involves the following steps. Identify assets and value. This step involves identifying the organization's critical business functions, processes, and assets, and determines their value to the organization. Example, a retail store identifies its critical business functions, such as inventory management, sales, and customer service, and determines the value of each function in terms of revenue generated and customer satisfaction. Next, risk identification threats. This step involves identifying potential threats to the organization's critical business functions and assets. Example, the retail store identifies potential threats such as a natural disaster, cyber attack, and supply chain disruptions. Okay, for business impact analysis continued, next we'll look at likelihood estimations, so ARO. This step involves estimating the likelihood of each individual threat occurring and the frequency of occurrence over a period of time. Example, the retail store estimates the likelihood of a natural disaster occurring in an area where its stores are located and the frequency of such event over a specific period. The impact assessment, exposure factor. These steps involve assessing the impact of each identified threat and the organization's critical business functions and assets. Example, the retail store assesses the impact of supply chain disruption on its inventory management functions and the impact of cyber attacks on its customer data. Next, for resource prioritization analysis. This step involves prioritizing the organization's critical business functions and assets based on their value to the organization and potential impact of the disruptive event. Example, the retail store prioritizes its critical business function and assets based on their value to the organization and the potential impact of a natural disaster, cyber attack, or supply chain disruption. And for continuity planning is a critical part of the business continuity planning process that involves creating strategies and plans to ensure continuity of critical business functions and minimize the impact of a disruptive event. The continuity planning process involves the following steps. Strategy planning. This step involves developing strategies that bridge the gap between the business impact analysis and the continuity planning. The strategy should identify alternative methods to continue a critical business function during a disruptive event. Example, a healthcare provider develops strategies to ensure patient care continues during a natural disaster, such as relocating patients to another facility or implementing telemedicine services. Next, for provisioning and process. This step is the meat of the BCP and involves identifying, implementing processes to ensure the continuity of critical business functions. This includes identifying resources such as people, buildings, and infrastructure required to continue critical business functions. Example, an e-commerce company identifies backup servers and cloud-based infrastructure to ensure its online stores remain operational during a cyber attack. And next we'll look at plan approval. This step involves obtaining senior management's support and approval for the continuity plan. It is essential to have top-level support for the plan to ensure its effectiveness during a disruptive event. Example, a financial institution obtains senior management support and approval for its continuity plan to ensure the continuity of critical financial operations during a natural disaster. Plan implementation. This step involves implementing the continuity plan during a disruptive event. It is essential to test the plan regularly to identify gaps and improve its effectiveness. Example, a manufacturer company implements its continuity plan during a supply chain disruption by sourcing raw material from alternative suppliers and implementing a lean manufacturing process. Next is training and education. This step involves providing training and education to employees on the continuity plan, their roles and responsibilities during a disruptive event. Example, an energy company provides training to employees on emergency response procedures, such as shutting down equipment during a natural disaster, to ensure the continuity of critical operations. All right, so next we'll look at the business continuity planning documentation. So first, the goal of the continuity plan. Second is the statement of importance. Third is statement of priorities. Fourth is statement of organizational responsibilities. Fifth is statement of urgency and timing. Six is risk assessment. Seven is risk acceptance/mitigations. So the business continuity planning documentation. Goals of the continuity plan ensure critical business functions are restored within 24 hours of a disaster. The statement of importance. The continuity plan is critical to the survival of the business and its ability to serve customers. And the statement of priorities. People's safety is the top priority, followed by restoration and critical business functions. Fourth is the statement of organizational responsibility. Each department is responsible for ensuring their own continuity plans are up to date and align with the overall plan. Fifth is the statement of urgency and timing. The continuity plan must be reviewed and updated annually and tested regularly to ensure effectiveness. And sixth, risk assessment. Identify potential risk and threats to the business and determine the likelihood and impact of each scenario. And seventh, risk acceptance mitigation. Determine whether to accept or mitigate each risk and develop plans to mitigate the highest priority risk. Okay, so next we'll be looking at types of laws. So first we'll look at criminal law, which focuses on crimes against society, with law enforcement agencies responsible for investigating and prosecuting offenders. Examples include murder, robbery, and drug trafficking. Next, we'll look at civil laws, which govern disputes such between individuals or organizations with the goal of resolving conflict and compensating victims. Examples include personal injury lawsuits, breach of contract cases, and defragmentation cases. Next, we'll look at administrative law. Governs the procedures used by the government agencies, including rulemaking, enforcement, actions, and appeals. Examples include regulations created by the environmental protection agencies and enforcement acts taken by the Security and Exchange Commission. Okay, Comprehensive Crime Control Act of 1984. The Comprehensive Crime Control Act of 1984 was the first law created to address computer-related crimes. It includes provisions that criminalize activities such as unauthorized access to classified information, intentionally causing damage to federal computer systems worth more than $1,000, altering or damaging medical resources through the use of computers or technology. These provisions were designed to protect against computer-based attacks and to provide legal recourse for victims of such attacks. Next, we'll be looking at the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, CFAA. The Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, CFAA, was enacted in 1986 as an amendment to the Comprehensive Crime Control Act. It was designed to address computer-related crimes, including unauthorized access to computer systems and theft of information. In 1994, an amendment was added to the CFAA that criminalized the creation and distribution of malicious code, such as viruses and malware. This amendment was a response to the growing threat of cyber attacks and aimed to deter individuals from using technology to harm others. Next, we'll look at the Computer Security Act of 1987. The Computer Security Act of 1987 amended the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act and established guidelines for securing sensitive federal information processed by computer systems. Under the Act, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, was given the responsibility to develop guidelines and standards for securing federal computer systems and networks. Mandatory periodic training for federal employees who use these systems was also introduced. The Act also stipulated that classified information should be handled by the National Security Agency, NSA, while unclassified information should be handled by NIST. These measures were implemented to strengthen the security of federal computer systems and protect against unauthorized access and disclosure of sensitive information. The Paper Reduction Act of 1995. The Paper Reduction Act of 1995 requires federal agencies to obtain approval from the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, before requesting any information from the public. Government Information Security Reform Act, GISRA, of 2000. The Government Information Security Reform Act of 2000 places the responsibility of maintaining the security and integrity of government information on the government itself. Next, we'll look at the Federal Information Security Management Act, FISMA. The Federal Information Security Management Act, FISMA, of 2022 mandates that all federal agencies in the United States must implement an information security program that covers the agency's operations. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, is responsible for developing guidelines and standards for FISMA implementation, including risk assessments, security planning, periodic security testing and evaluation, and continuous monitoring. The Act requires agencies to develop and maintain security policies and procedures, train employees on information security, and report security incidents to designated officials. The goal of FISMA is to ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of federal information and information systems. Next, we'll look at the intellectual property copyrights. Copyright refers to the exclusive legal right granted to the author or creator of an original work, covering the expression of their idea and remains in effect until 70 years after their death. The Digital Millennium Copyright Act, DMCA, is a law that provides protection to copyright owners in the digital age. It prohibits attempts to circumvent technology measures designed to protect copyright works, and also provides some protection to Internet Service Providers, ISPs, from liabilities for copyright infringement that occurs on their network if they comply with certain requirements. Next, we'll look at trademarks. Trademarks are symbols, logos, or distinctive marks used to identify a company's product or service and differentiate them from others in the market. The purpose of a trademark is to protect branding, reputation, and prevent others from using similar marks to confuse or deceive customers. Trademarks are granted for a period of 10 years, and they can be renewed for an additional 10-year period indefinitely as long as the owner continues to use the protected mark. Example of trademarks include Apple logos for Apple Inc., the golden arches of McDonald's, and the Nike swoosh logo. Patents. Patents provide legal protection for investors' rights and are valid for 20 years from the date the patent application is filed. Examples: the patent for telephone was filed by Alexander Graham Bell in 1976 and was valid for 20 years from that date. A software company files a patent for a new algorithm they developed, which would be valid for 20 years from the date the application is filed, protecting their intellectual property from competitors. All right, next we'll move on to trade secrets. The term trade secret refers to the confidential information that gives a business competitive advantage. Examples include the KFC recipe and the Coca-Cola formula. Unlike patents, trademarks, and copyrights, there is no legal protection for trade secrets. The only way to protect trade secrets is through proper security controls. Next, we'll look at software licensing IP. Licensing refers to the granting of permissions to use software, and there are several types of license agreements. First one is contractual licensing, a written agreement between the software vendor and licensee. Next is going to be shrink wrap licensing. Licensing terms are printed on the outside of the software package. Next is going to be click-through licenses. The licensee agrees to the terms and conditions of the license agreement during the software installation. And fourth is cloud licensing. The license agreement is displayed on the screen and must be agreed to before accessing the software. Okay, next we'll look at safe harbor. Safe harbor, a framework for businesses to comply with the EU data protection laws when transferring personal data outside the EU. Next, we'll look at the Weisner Agreement. The Weisner Agreement is an international agreement on export controls for conventional arms and dual-use goods and technologies, including certain encryption items. All right, so next we'll look at U.S. privacy laws, specifically the Fourth Amendment. U.S. privacy laws, specifically the Fourth Amendment, prohibits the search of private property without a valid search warrant. This amendment protects individuals from unreasonable search and seizures by law enforcement agencies. It establishes the requirement for authorities to obtain a warrant based on probable cause before conducting a search. Additionally, agencies should only retain records that are necessary and relevant for their legitimate purposes. Records that are no longer needed or have fulfilled their intended use should be appropriately destroyed to prevent any potential misuse or unauthorized access. Example, search warrants. All right, so law enforcement officials can't enter someone's private residence without obtaining a search warrant from a judge, which demonstrates probable cause to believe that evidence of a crime will be found on the property. Next is going to be data retention. A government agency collecting personal data from individuals should only retain records that are directly relevant to their investigation or purpose. Once the retention period expires or the data is no longer necessary, the agency should securely dispose of the records to protect the individual's privacy and prevent unauthorized access. All right, so other privacy laws. We got the Electronic Communication Privacy Act of 1986. This law criminalizes the invasion of electronic privacy, protecting individuals from unauthorized access or interception of their electronic communications. We have the Communication Assistance for Law Enforcement of 1994. This law allows law enforcement agencies to conduct wiretapping or intercept communications within proper court orders or legally or authorized legal procedures. And we have the Economic and Protection of Property Information Act of 1996. This law categorizes the theft of economical information as espionage, aiming to protect proprietary and trade secret information from unauthorized acquisition or use. And next we have the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996. And this act focuses on the protection of protected health information, PHI, and established guidelines for the privacy and security of personal health information held by covered entities such as healthcare providers, health plans, and clearinghouses. So other privacy laws. We have the Health Information Technology for Economic and Clinical Health of 2009. This act extends the requirements of HIPAA to include business associates, BAs, who handle PHI on behalf of the covered entities. It mandates that covered entities and BAs have written agreements called the Business Associate Agreement, BAA, to ensure the protection and proper handling of PHI. We have the Children Online Privacy Protection Act of 2000. This act aims to protect the privacy and personal information of children under 13 years of age. It requires online services and websites to obtain parental consent before collecting, using, or disclosing personal information of children. We have the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act of 1999. This act applies for financial institutions and banks, requiring them to protect the privacy and security of customers' personal financial information and to disclose their information sharing practices to customers. Next, we have the U.S. Patriot Act of 2001, enacted after September 11th attacks. This act provides law enforcement agencies with broader surveillance capabilities to investigate and prevent terrorist activities. It expands the scope of surveillance activities in the interest of national security. Other privacy laws include the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. This act safeguards the privacy of student education records and applies to educational institutes that receive funding from the federal government. It grants certain rights to parents and students regarding access and control over their educational records. Next, we have the Identity Theft Act of 1998. This act addresses the issue of identifying thefts and makes it a federal crime. It provides for criminal penalties for individuals who engage in identity theft activities, such as unauthorized use of another person's personal information for fraudulent purposes. All right, and we have the European Union privacy laws. The European Union privacy laws is a legal framework that provides guidance and requirements for protecting personal data processed within information systems. The law aims to ensure the privacy and security of individuals' personal information to comply with the European Union's privacy laws. Certain criteria must be met. For one of those criteria is consent. Individuals must give their explicit and informed consent for their personal data to be processed by the data controller. This consent should be freely given and specific to the purpose of which the data is processed. Second, contract. Processing personal data may be necessary to fulfill a contract or agreement between the data subject and the data controller. In such case, the processing is allowed based on the contractual relationship. And third, legal obligation. Data processing may be required to comply with legal obligations imposed on the data controller. This includes situations where data processing is necessary for the fulfillment of legal requirements. And fourth, vital interest of the data subject. Data processing may be necessary to protect the vital interests of the data subject or other individuals. This criteria applies in situations where processing is essential for preserving someone's life and physical integrity. Next, we'll look at balance of interest. The interest of the data subject and the data controller should be balanced when considering the necessity of data processing. This criteria ensures that the processing does not disproportionately infringe on the rights and the freedoms of the individual. Now, European Union privacy law examples. Consent. An online retailer obtains explicit consent from the customer before processing their personal data for order fulfillment and marketing purposes. Contract. A bank processes personal data of its customers as part of providing financial services based on the contractual relationship established with the customer. Legal obligation. A healthcare institute processes patients' data to fulfill legal requirements such as reporting infectious disease to the public health authorities. Vital interest of the data subject. Emergency medicine services process personal data to provide life-saving treatments to an unconscious patient. Balance of interest. A marketing company collects and processes personal data for targeting advertisements while ensuring that individual privacy rights are respected and balanced with their interest in receiving relative offers. European Union privacy laws continued. Individuals have key rights regarding their personal data that is held by the organization. These rights empower individuals to have control over their data and ensure its accuracy and lawful processing. The key rights of individuals regarding their data are as followed. Right to access. Individuals have a right to request and obtain access to their personal data held by an organization. This allows individuals to be aware and verify the information that is being processed about them. Second is the right to know the data source. Individuals have a right to know source of their personal data. This provides transparency and allows individuals to understand how their data was obtained and whether it's collected directly from them or from other sources. Third is the right to correct inaccurate data. Individuals have the right to request the correction and amendment of any inaccurate or incomplete personal data held by an organization. This ensures that their data is up to date and accurate. Fourth, right to withhold consent. In certain situations, individuals have a right to withhold their consent to the processing of their personal data. Organizations must respect this right and not proceed with the processing without a valid legal basis or legitimate interest. And fifth, right of legal action. Individuals have the right to take legal actions if their rights regarding their personal data are violated. This provides individuals with the recourse mechanisms to seek remedies, such as compensation, in case of data protection infringements. Okay, so European Union privacy laws continued, and we have a few examples here. So the first one is the right to access. And individual requests access to their personal data for online shopping platforms to review their purchase history and account details. Second is the right to know the data source. A person asks a credit card reporting agency to disclose the sources from which they obtain the individual's credit information to understand how their credit worthiness is being accessed. Third is right to correct inaccuracy data. An employee notices that their job title is incorrect and their personal file and requests their employer to update the information with accurate job titles. Fourth, right to withhold consent. A user declines to give consent to a social media platform to share their personal data with third-party advertisers, exercising their rights to withhold consent for targeted advertising. And fifth, right to legal action. An individual discovers that their personal data has been unlawfully shared with unauthorized parties, and they file a lawsuit against the organization for violating their data protection rights. All right, so next we'll look at the European Union Global Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. The European Union Global Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, is a comprehensive law that applies to all organizations collecting data from EU residents or processing it on their behalf of such organizations. The GDPR aims to protect individuals' personal data and provide them with certain rights and protection. Key provisions of GDPR include a mandatory breach notification. Organizations are required to notify relevant authorities of any data breaches within 72 hours of becoming aware of the breach. This promotes prompt action and transparency in addressing data security incidents. Next, we have centralized data protection authorities. The GDPR establishes centralized data protection authorities in each EU member state. These authorities oversee and enforce data protection regulations, ensuring consent and harmonized enforcement across the EU. Right of access. Individuals have the right to access their own personal data held by the organization. This enables individuals to review and verify the accuracy and lawfulness of their information being processed about them. And fifth, the data portability. Individuals have the right to receive their personal data in a structured, commonly used, and machine-readable format. This facilitates the transfer of their personal information between different service providers, empowering individuals to switch service providers easily while maintaining control over their data. And next we have right to erasure and right to be forgotten. Individuals have the right to request the deletion or removal of their personal data if it is no longer necessary for purposes it was collected. If consent is withdrawn or if the processing is unlawful, this ensures individuals have control over their data and can exercise their right to have their personal information erased under certain circumstances. Okay, so we'll take a look at the European Union Global Data Protection Regulation, GDPR examples here. Okay, so a breach notification, an e-commerce platform promptly notifies the relevant data protections and authorities within 72 hours after discovering a data breach that compromised customers' personal information. Next, for centralized data protection authorities. A multinational company operating in multiple EU countries received guidance and enforcement actions from the centralized data protection authorities in each respective country. Next is right of access. An individual requests access to their personal data held by social media platforms, including their profile information, posts, and preferences. Next, we have data portability. A customer requests their personal data from an online banking platform in a machine-readable format to transfer to a new financial service provider for account management purposes, and the right to erasure. An individual asks an online retailer to delete their personal data and account information after closing their account and no longer using the retailer's services. All right, so we'll look at the European Union Global Data Protection Regulation, DPO. So the role of the Data Protection Officer, DPO, involves various tasks to ensure compliance with data protection regulations and promote responsibility of data handling within an organization. The key task of a DPO includes informing and advertising and advising. The DPO provides guidance and advice to the data controller or processor and their employees regarding their obligations under the data protection laws, including the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. This involves educating and raising awareness about data protection requirements. Another responsibility is monitoring and compliance. The DPO is responsible for monitoring compliance with the GDPR as well as other relevant data protection laws and internal data protection policies. This includes overseeing the assignment of responsibilities, conducting training programs for staff involved in data processing, and conducting audits to assess compliance levels. Another responsibility is the Data Protection Impact Assessment, DPIA. The DP provides advice and guidance on conducting a DPIA, which is an assessment of the potential risk and impacts of data processing activities on individual privacy rights. The DPO monitors the performance of DPIA and collaborates with supervisory authorities on related matters. And next is going to be contract point for supervisory authority. The DPO serves as the primary contract point for the supervisor authority, which is the regulatory body responsible for enforcing data protection laws. The DPO facilitates communication and cooperation with the supervisor authority, including prior consent on data processing activities and seeking advice on relevant matters. So here's an example of some DPO responsibilities here. So informing and advising. A DPO educates employees of a healthcare organization about their responsibilities in handling patient data and provides guidance on complying with the data protection regulations when processing personal health information. Second, we have monitoring compliance. A DPO conducts regular audits of a financial institution's data processing activities to ensure compliance with the GDPR, reviews internal policies, and provides training sessions to employees to enhance their awareness of data protection practices. Next one is going to be Data Protection Impact Assessment, DPIA. The DPO assesses an e-commerce company in conducting a DPIA for a new marketing campaign that involves collecting and analyzing customer data. The DPO provides guidance on identifying and mitigating potential privacy risk associated with the campaign. And fourth is contract point for supervisor authority. A DPO serves as a point of contract between a technology company and the supervisory authority, facilitating discussions on data protection matters, seeking prior consultation on the new data processing projects, and providing necessary information as required by the supervisory authority. Okay, and we have contracts and procurement next. When engaging in contracting and procurement activities, it is essential for organizations to thoroughly review and assess services or applications before finalizing contracts. This involves asking relevant questions to ensure the protection of the organization's information. Some key considerations include information protection controls. Organizations should inquire about the security controls implemented by the vendor to safeguard the organization's information. This could include measures such as encryption, access control, data backup procedures, and vulnerability management. Another thing they want to know before contracts are signed is going to be handling of sensitive information. It's important to determine what types of sensitive information will be stored, processed, or transmitted by the vendor. This could include personal data, financial information, intellectual property, or any other confidential information. Understanding the vendor's approach to handling of such data is crucial. All right, next we have security audits and access. Inquiring about their security audit practices of the vendor is important. Organizations should understand the frequency and scope of security audits performed by the vendor. Additionally, it is necessary to clarify the level of access the organization will have to these audits, as it enables transparency and helps ensure compliance with security requirements. All right, so some examples of contracting and procurement. Let's say we have a healthcare organization considering a new cloud storage provider. So we would ask the vendor about their data protection controls, including encryption mechanisms, access control, and compliance with healthcare data security regulations such as HIPAA. Another example, a financial institute is in the process of procuring a payment processing service. Request information from the vendor regarding the type of sensitive information they will handle. such as credit card numbers or bank account details, to assess the vendor's security measures in protecting that data. And last example here is going to be an organization looking to outsource its IT infrastructure to a managed service provider seeks information about the provider's security audit procedures. They also inquire about the availability of audit reports and whether the organization will have access to review and validate the findings for compliance purposes. Okay, and that's all we have for domain 2 or domain 1. We'll be following up this video with domain 2. Thank you for watching.